of the things that I've always thought about, David, I mean, this came home to me with the COVID saga, and people falling apart very early on in that. You know, these are just general everyday people, and then I think about people who have been through years of troubles like yourself, come through it, and through that have gained some sort of good degree of resilience. And there's a lot that you and fellow recoverees can teach people who haven't had those sorts of problems. Do you see that as well, that in a way you're beacons of hope for people going through adversities of different kinds?
To be honest, I've not seen myself in that light. I can see why that might be useful. I suppose I've done a couple of short videos which have been aimed not specifically at people with alcohol and drug problems, but generally about, you know, coping and how not to use alcohol or how to avoid using alcohol as a coping mechanism. So there's a little bit of experience of a more generic thing. But if I just take a step back and don't think of myself, of course, what you're suggesting makes sense. I think anyone who managed to negotiate adversity and comes out the other side must have lessons which are of useful utility for people, other people who are going through similar experiences that might not necessarily be related to alcohol or drugs. There's some interesting work done on survivors, isn't there, and on recovering populations, looking at the quality of life that can be obtained when you work through recovery from natural disasters or you know, awful things that can happen to us. That often the learning through those processes leads to a better quality of life than you would have had the disaster never happened to you. And I think, although I'd say it probably took a fair bit of time for me to get to a point where I thought, oh, my quality of life now is so much better than it was. It was definitely better than when I was drinking or using. But when I look back at my earlier life, you know, it's a bit of a while into recovery before I could look back and say, I think I'm better off now than I would have been had alcohol never been a problem for me.
Yeah, I've heard a number of recovering people. I know someone who sadly has passed, who I think actually had tattoo better than well. But no, I was thinking in terms of, I know that Bruce Perry, for example, I think he's got a video clip with Oprah Winfrey where he actually talks about the people that he knows who are doing great things and helping other people generally have all been through great adversities themselves, and that's left them with a strong resilience and a desire to help others. And it goes beyond that specific area. But I'm also thinking in terms that, and this is a long-term thing, is at the moment there's so much stigma around people who've had drug and alcohol problems. But actually, the more we hear of people like yourself doing things like working in treatment services, setting up things, and going wider than that, the more chances are we have a gradually reducing stigma. And, you know, there's an increasing adversities in today's world. So, you know, we need more positives of people, hearing more positives of people overcoming adversity. And this is just one form of adversity, one which has sadly been heavily stigmatized over the years.
Absolutely. And I think I've been fortunate that I've been open about my recovery for most of it. And I have encountered relatively little stigma, but I have encountered stigma. I have encountered stigma that threatened to prevent me returning to my career. And also, quite interestingly, an experience I'll just briefly tell you about so when I came home from rehab, I wasn't able to return to work immediately, so I had no income, had significant amount of debt, and had to go on to benefits. So being in the benefits system for the first time was a really interesting experience, because when I was called for an assessment, so I had to have give a kind of history to a doctor, and also to go through a physical examination, I guess, to see whether I was entitled to benefits or what my entitlement should be. So I duly turned up at the centre and went in to see the doctor. And so this is my genuine memory of what happened. So he didn't look up when I went in. He was writing on a form and he didn't look at me at all and just asked me questions. He didn't know he didn't know my profession, didn't know my previous job. So he asked me questions. Obviously, on my sickness, my sick note, it had something like addiction or alcohol dependence or something like that. It was a potentially stigmatizing term, and he asked me questions about it. I told him what had happened and what I'd been through. There was no eye contact at all and no connection. And then I had a very cursory physical examination, which I suppose I was in a better position to assess than most people that are going through benefits medicals. And then just finally, after he'd done all this stuff, he didn't give anything away about what he thought about it or anything. He said to me, "So what was your job?" And I said, "I'm a GP." And at that moment, he looked at me in the eye and said, "Oh, this must have been terrible for you." So everything changed when I was able to be something he recognized. But when I was just a recovering person in the system, he wasn't the least bit interested. And I thought, this must be how my patients are treated in the benefit system. This must be what it feels like. I was actually in a good enough place to be curious about it and interested in it rather than angry with him. I didn't feel anger towards him. I just thought, this is not good. And there are a few examples of that sort of thing where I just felt, this is not, I'd prefer my patients to be treated better than this if this is the norm. So yeah, the stigmatization, I think you do overcome that by speaking out. There's a risk to speaking out. If you lift your head above the parapet, you get shot at. I've had experiences of people dismissing my lived experience because I'm a doctor, because it's not getting a relationship to theirs so I've had that experience. Not often, to be fair. Most of my experience about speaking out has been a positive, but there is a risk, and you have to consider that risk before you do interviews like this, because once it's out there, it's out there.
I'll give you the flip side of the coin. I can't remember if I've told you the story. Maybe I'll have told you the story about me and your groups. And you know that I always used to enjoy coming and sitting in group. And there was one time one of the patients said to me, "Professor Clark." I said, "No, not Professor David. David, we've all been wondering whether, you come here and sit in when you're in Edinburgh. We're just wondering whether you have a drug or alcohol problem." And I said, "I certainly don't have a drug problem. I don't think I've got an alcohol problem. I come to these groups because I really enjoy you. I'm inspired by you. I'm learning from you. And let's put it this way, I enjoy myself far more than sitting with you than with a bunch of academics.